that kind of mean the same thing. The idea is that he hearkened or he listened closely. It's almost as if he was kind of bending down. Now, God doesn't have to bend down, but understand it this way, that he's bending down. He's listening closely. Have you ever eavesdropped on somebody? Put your ear to the door. I mean, you're listening. You shouldn't do that, but if you did, you put your ear to the door. You're listening real closely to it. That's the idea. He's intently listening. He's watching their mouth so that you can see exactly what they're saying. It's the idea that he was listening intently to it. And it says, and he heard it. That is, he will do something about it. God hears everything. I know I've heard it preached before that, God doesn't hear the prayer of the unsaved and this and that. It's not that God is deaf. It's not like I can't hear what they're saying. I see their mouths moving, but I don't hear what they're saying. It's the idea that he's not going to do anything about it. But he hears the voice of his children. That means he's going to do something about it. When you tell your children, did you hear me? Usually they did hear you. It means, are you going to do something about what I told you? Are you going to listen and obey? And so he listened closely to us, and he's going to do something about it. The difference is that he acts upon the words of his children. So God responds, and in his response to hearing his children talk together, and those that fear him coming together, it says that a book of remembrance was written for those that fear the Lord and that thought upon his name. I want to ask you the question that if we open the book that God has written about you, if you fear the Lord and you think upon his name, and how often you do that, how many pages would be in that book? How often could you be seen to fear him and live in obedience to him and think upon his name? Has that book ever been started? It certainly begins with salvation as we come to know the Lord, but it continues as we think upon his name. And notice to those that fear him, and notice to those that think upon his name, God makes an expression of love. And the theme of our message tonight is found in verse number 17. And this is where I think it really hammers home the difference between the righteous and the wicked. And this is God speaking in verse 17 about those that fear his name and those that spake often one to another. He says, and they shall be mine. They shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts. In that day, when I make up my jewels, and I will spare them as a man spareth his own son that serveth him. I love the idea that God brings out here, that the righteous will be possessed by him. They will be like a jewel that is placed in a crown, a precious jewel, something that is prized and something that is taken care of. What's so good about serving God? Verse number 17, you belong to him. They are mine, God says. They shall be mine. They belong to me. Those that feared me and those that thought upon me, God says, those are mine. They are my precious jewels. The jewel is given as the idea of something that's taken care of, something that has great worth and great value to the one who owns it. When Sarah and I got engaged, I, of course, got a ring, and I've always encouraged our young ladies in youth group that if the guy doesn't have enough money to buy you a nice ring, then he's probably not going to have enough money to buy you a decent house. So you tell him to get lost, get a job, get respectable, and then come, and then you can see what you can do. But the whole idea is, if he can't take the time to buy, and I'm not talking about some Cracker Jack, I'm talking about a decent ring. But anyway, so that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But the whole point is that this jewel, when I bought Sarah a ring, and I bought her a ring, I tried to buy a decent one, and not too gaudy, but I think it's a nice one. And when I was about to propose to her, I kept feeling my pocket where it was. I was sure I was going to lose it. I mean, I was like so certain that it was going to reach in my pocket, there's nothing there kind of thing. That would have been a very bad thing. But I took it out often. I made sure that it was not misplaced. I wanted to see how shiny it was and how sparkly it was, and it came, and it was so beautiful. And I checked my pocket a million times. Why did I do that? Because it cost a lot of money. Because it was something that is precious. It was valuable. It was something that was a jewel. And in the same way, God says that those that fear me, they are my jewels. They are precious to me. They have great worth and they have great value. And he says, because they are precious, I will spare them. I'm not just going to discard them. I'm not just going to throw them away, but I will spare them. I will keep them. And he says, I will spare them just like a father does who spares his son who serves him. What a difference between a son that causes shame and a son that honors his parents. And God says, I'm going to spare him like a son who honors me, and a son that has great worth and great value. And so then after God does that, then the distinction will be made clear. And that's where we go into verse number 18. We see verses 13 through 17, and the distinction between the righteous and the wicked is somewhat dim. It's not really easy to tell what the difference between the two is. But verse number 18, God says, I want the distinction to be made clear to you. After I spare them, in verse number 18 it says, then shall ye return and discern between the righteous and the wicked, between him that serveth God and him that serveth him not. The distinction between the righteous and the wicked in death. As blurry at times as the line between the wicked and the righteous is in life, is as defined and distinct as it will be in death. You remember how I said sometimes we take a step back and we wonder, is this really worth it? Is all of what I'm doing and all the effort I'm putting forth and all the money I'm laying out and all the time I'm expending and living a pure life, and is that really worth it? Remember how sometimes we take a step back and we wonder and we look at someone else who isn't doing all those things and they look like they're pretty well off. They look like they're doing fine to me. They don't look like they're having some of the problems I'm having. Is it really worth it to follow God and to do that? God says it might be difficult to discern that now, but in that day, in that final day, there will be no question at all. And that is the end of chapter 3, and really the beginning of chapter 4 is the description of the contrast. God says in that day, when you come back and you take a look, when you take a step back then, it will be as clear as day. There will be no question. It's not going to be, I wonder, was it helpful to serve God or not? Was it good that I lived a righteous life and that I came to know Jesus as my Savior? Because I can't tell. No, in that day, it's crystal clear. It's abundantly clear. Those that serve God will be blessed. Those that forsook God, those that rejected God, will face His judgment and His punishment. What's the difference? Well, look what it says in chapter 4, as you start in verse number 1. For behold, the day cometh, and again, this is all future, that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, remember the proud before looked like they were set up and they were happy, that all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble, and the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. There's a day coming that will burn as an oven. Say, what does that refer to? I think it refers to the lake of fire. There's coming a day of judgment. There's coming a day when God will judge the wicked. And beyond that, God says all the proud and all the wicked will be stubble for that fire. That is, they'll be fuel for that fire. Judgment is coming for the ungodly of eternal destruction. Jude chapter 1, God says to execute judgment upon all, to convince all that are ungodly among them, of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. There is judgment coming for the ungodly. The word ungodly is used, I think, 3 or 4 times in that section. In John chapter 5, in verse 26, it says, for as the Father hath life in himself, so hath he given to the Son to have life in himself, and hath given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. So judgment was committed to the Son, and judgment will be carried out. And when God executes judgment, there is no chance to get out from under that. Because Malachi says, all that do wickedly shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. The idea of leaving neither root nor branch means that they are utterly destroyed. If you don't have the root anymore, you can't grow it back. It needs a root in order to grow. This is the end of the wicked in his death. But now let's look at the contrast that Malachi makes between the wicked and the righteous. In verse number 2, he says, but unto you that fear my name, shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings. And ye